looks like we're about ready here. Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, here we are. We are live.
Great.
Welcome everyone to the AAC in the Cloud 2020 conference. We're super glad to have you. And thank you for your patience with all of the kind of technical glitches we had earlier today. Just a reminder, this course is in track 3 on Slack, so make sure you switch groups if your previous course was another track. So make sure you switch over to track 3 so you're in the right place. And let's get right into it. We have with us James Brinton, who is going to help us demystify EYEGAZE AAC assessments with evidence-based practice guidelines. So James, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for attending today. My name is James Brinton, speech pathologist with EYEGAZE Incorporated. We are based out of Fairfax, Virginia. And yes, I'm going to be talking a little bit about demystifying the EYEGAZE AAC assessment process using the guiding principles that ASHA has given us for evidence-based practice. So let's jump on in. I will disclose that I am a full-time employee for EYEGAZE Incorporated, and we make and sell a device called the EYEGAZE Edge. I will be talking a little bit about the EYEGAZE Edge at the end of the presentation, but I would really like to focus big picture on EYEGAZE assessment in general terms, no matter whose device or what device you have in front of you, in the clinic that you work at, or which vendor you have coming to your patient's home. At the end, we'll have time for some questions and answers. My companion slides have been uploaded to AAC in the clouds, and I have some additional companion documents if you need specific resources for your patients. And we welcome you to call our 1-800 number. It's 1-800-EYEGAZE. If you have specific EYEGAZE or eye tracking questions about a patient that you may be working with, we're here to help. And we've really specialized since 1987 in helping individuals access eye tracking no matter how their eyes are changing over the course of their diagnosis. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this concept called try before you buy. We know that there are many products that we want to try before we buy it. Some products we don't need to do that. When you go to the grocery store, you just pick up your groceries. You don't have to try out anything. However, there are some bigger purchases that you absolutely must try before you commit to buying. So what are some of these? I bought my first brand new car for 2 years ago for the first time. And you bet I did a bunch of research. I test drove models. I looked up reliability reports. So a car is a good example of something that you need to try out before you buy it. Well, we also use this concept with clothes. We never go into a shoe store and just point to a pair of shoes on the wall and say, wrap that up, I'll take that. We put it on, right? We walk around the store, we try out a few different sizes and styles of shoes before we commit to purchasing one. And then of course, house hunting. We want to look at different homes, and there's a whole television network dedicated to this concept, try before you buy, with homes, right? The couple walks into house A, to house B, to house C. They're comparing, they're asking their realtor, they're imagining the possibility. And innately, there's a sense of enjoyment that all of us have as human beings, seeing the couple ask the hard questions and ultimately choosing the right home for them and for their family. It's so joyful to us, in fact, that we say, oh, I knew they would pick that house, I was right. So there is something very important and very satisfying about getting the right fit for the individual. Now, that said, we want to transfer this joy and this desire to the process of EYEGAZE assessment for AAC devices. We know that there are several companies that make EYEGAZE AAC devices, several companies that make eye tracking cameras, several companies that make software that's accessible by EYEGAZE. So our job as evaluators is really to put the pieces together, collect the data, and really comparison shop with the individual, with the family, to find the device that works best for that individual. So transferring this try before you buy as a concept into the AAC realm, what does that include? Well, first it includes data collection. When we have the patient in front of us with the device, we're going to be collecting different types of data. There will be feature comparison. Does device A have the same features or different features than device B? And what features does my patient or my client really need to thrive? There will be education not only to the AAC communicator, but to their family, if the family is heavily involved, on what this access might mean for them. And of course, there's going to be excitement about potential that's currently unmet, but that could be possible with a new appropriate access method. With that as well, of course, we're always going to educate about realistic expectations for the communicator and for their communication partners. So these are some of the key pieces that we're going to try out before we recommend a device for a patient. My role with EYEGAZE Incorporated is to travel nationally and to teach clinical teams on how to implement EYEGAZE appropriately for which populations and what devices have to offer. In my travels across the country, I've run into several interesting scenarios. Often when I meet with a speech therapist or with an evaluating team, I ask them, tell me a little bit about how your evaluation process works. Does the patient come in, or do you send the vendor to the home? Now we have a lot of virtual assessments and evaluation procedures going on. So tell me how it works. And some therapy centers have a very well-developed process for this. Other therapists and centers are learning how to do this appropriately. And likewise, on the other hand, sometimes I run into therapy centers where they are doing things in a way that kind of does a disservice to their patients. This first quote is one that I had. I asked the therapist, well, tell me, how do you provide the AAC EYEGAZE assessment for your patient? And this SLP said, well, I call in one company, and if the device works, then they get that device. So it was just a one-shot and a recommendation, which is not the way that ASHA says we should be doing things. Here's another patient that I ran across who said, I tried multiple devices at the ALS conference, and I found the one that works the best for me. Now, this patient was a very tech-savvy, computer-literate person, so he was looking through a very specific lens for a device that would meet his needs. But he said, but the center I went to told me which device I'm getting, and it was the one that I didn't like, the one that didn't work for me, unfortunately. Another family I went to, they were having trouble with their AAC device that was recommended to them. I went in and they said, this device has sat in the closet for 3 years, it's useless and I can't use it. So they were recommended a device that was not working for them and was not implemented appropriately. And another family I went into, I was speaking to the spouse and he said, well, EYEGAZE doesn't work for my wife. And he had this false belief for 10 years. So this woman was without available communication for over 10 years in her diagnosis because the family had a bad experience and was under the impression that this technology would not work for the person. So each one of these instances can, what went wrong? Where was the breakdown? Each one of these illustrates something along the process that wasn't done correctly. And we're gonna tease out what some of these things are and talk about some success stories as well. So what does ASHA say? Let's start with the evidence-based practice triangle. ASHA says that the EBP triangle, our way of doing our work is to take research evidence or data that we collect, data that's available in the field, meld it with our practitioner expertise, and then also bring in the client's preferences and the client's values into the process of making that clinical decision. So when we are looking at EYEGAZE AAC assessment, we want to rely on these three things: the data that we collect, our expertise, our gut feeling from that data and our interaction with the client, and then asking them what is important to them, what do they have to say about it, and what do they think about it. Putting this into a visual, we have our triangle with the data at the top, the clinician's expertise in one corner, and then the client's preferences and values in the other. When we do not rely on this model with EYEGAZE AAC assessment, I have seen higher rates of AAC device abandonment or unnecessary dissatisfaction and a decreased quality of life. So again, going into this assessment process for EYEGAZE devices, we want to take data. We need to research and get some expertise in this, and then we need to involve the family and the communicator heavily in what was their impression to make that clinical decision. Let's expound a little bit on what some other literature says. There was a publication in 2017 that says patients reported that augmentative and alternative communication, AAC, was an important part of quality of life to maintain communication and social contact. And from 2016, a center in the UK says AAC assessment should include access to multiple methods of communication. For example, keyboard typing, picture icon communication boards, if that's what's appropriate for them, telephone access, computer and email access, social media. These are all forms of communication. Now I have up here a statement by the NJC. It's called the Communication Bill of Rights. And I hope that each of you will take time to print this off, to read it. It's highlighted on ASHA's webpage. There's the URL at the bottom, asha.org/NJC. And I hope each one of us reads this, internalizes it, and then hangs it up in our office, because this outlines the Communication Bill of Rights, the rights that our communicators and us as communicators have. There are 3 points in here that really stand out to me as far as EYEGAZE AAC assessment. First of all, number 5 says that our communicators have the right to make choices from meaningful alternatives. What this means to me is going back to that first example I showed when I asked the clinic, well, how do you run your trials? And they say, well, we try one, and if it works, then the patient gets that. The NJC and ASHA is saying this patient has a device to make a choice between meaningful alternatives. In other words, we need to be showing more than one device. Number 9 says they have the right to access interventions and supports that improve communication. So if they try one device, but there's another device that may improve their communication even more than the first device, then they should try that one as well. Also, if our patients are recommended a device and get it installed and they're using it, they should have access to software updates or anything from that manufacturer that will improve that person's experience, including continued technical support and training. And then number 11 says that patients have the right to have access to functioning AAC and other assistive technology services and devices at all times. So patients should, again, be connected to a device that will be functioning for them, whether that be hardware, the technology needs to be functioning based on what their needs are, or have backup so they can use communication AAC tools at all times. Now, this article was published in ASHA Perspectives in the summer of 2018, and it was a great article called EYEGAZE 101, What Speech Language Pathologists Should Know About Selecting EYEGAZE, Augmentative, and Alternative Communication Systems. I really liked this article because it had powerful gems of knowledge that I've seen out in the field are really, really relevant. Here's where the title of my presentation comes in. This article said that completing an evaluation using an eye tracking device is one of the most challenging AAC evaluations to complete. SLPs must be knowledgeable in a variety of disorders and technologies. So this article is saying this type of assessment is one of the most challenging. And then they go on to talk about why is that? What things do we need to be researching and looking out for going into these assessments? So if you haven't read this article, I highly recommend it. The citation is up at the top. Let's talk a little bit more casually about why is this process so difficult so we can start to demystify it, take the mystery out of it. First of all, we need to know the types of devices that are out on the market. It's great if we can go to our state conference or maybe a big conference like Closing the Gap, CSUN, or ATIA in Orlando. It's great if we can try them out. However, many manufacturers of devices will have a regional or state rep that can connect you and give you a short in-service so you can know the devices that are available in your region. So we need to know the devices and the technology, first of all. And each company's rep can help you gain a little more confidence. So you don't have to be the expert in that device, but you know someone who is. Next, we need to know the language systems and the access methods. We all know that having the newest, most shiny, most beautiful device is not going to cut it if it does not have the language access that that person needs to communicate and use that device. So we need to be aware of the language systems available. We need to know various manufacturers, like I said. We need to anticipate the client's needs now and over time as their body may continue to change over the course of their diagnosis. And to make it even harder, a lot of these requests are time sensitive as well, so it has to be done in pretty short order. Okay, moving forward. This article continues to say, because SGD funding requests require trial considerations of at least 3 different speech-generating devices, more than one manufacturer's eye tracking device should be considered for the trial. Clinicians and EYEGAZE users want to have confidence in the eye tracking features that will benefit them. It's just like when you buy a car, you want to have confidence that you're making the right decision. This is something that is really the best fit for you. I underlined here, it's recommended that you, the SLP, get in touch with manufacturers that can, or multiple manufacturers that can trial multiple eye tracking cameras. That's a big piece of it. When we look at any EYEGAZE AAC device, we want to look at the individual device along 3 lines. First is the hardware, so the computer hardware, the mounting hardware, the actual physical things that we can touch. And then next is the software, which allows access to language pages, communication pages, and maybe computer access, environmental control. So we have the hardware, we have the software, and then third, this is very important, the camera that comes on that device. Like I said, there are companies that make their own eye tracking cameras with their device, and there are other manufacturers that will use other companies' eye tracking cameras on their device. We can talk a little bit about that. So we have these 3 avenues: 1, the hardware; 2, the software in that hardware; and then the eye tracking camera attached to that device. So let's talk about this in a real life example. So again, I have the 3 comparison points here. We have the hardware, the software, and the cameras. And I have pictures of 3 devices. So at the top, we have a Talk to Me Technologies device. Below that in yellow, we have an Accent 1400 by PRC. And to the left, we have the EYEGAZE Edge by EYEGAZE Incorporated. So let's compare these 3 devices along these 3 points. So first, the tablet, the actual computer. We'll notice that each one of these is a Windows-based device. Great. So very similar, but one may have a stronger computing ability, RAM, storage, processing speed, Wi-Fi connectivity than another device. So if we have a patient who is really into computer specs and is a high-level computer user, they may ask about this, and we can ask the manufacturers, tell me a little bit about your hardware specs. Each of these devices may have slightly different battery run times. That may be really important to some patients, okay? So each of these has different tablet hardware. Next, software. So the 2 that are pictured here, the EYEGAZE Edge on the left and then the Talk to Me Technologies device on the right, they're both running the Grid 3 software for communication for kids and adults. You'll notice, though, that the Grid 3 software in each device looks different because each of these companies has used Grid 3 to customize the look of their device. Okay? The PRC Accent here uses PRC's language systems, which is a wonderful fit for some clients. So knowing the differences in the software and how that will impact the patient's use is important. And then third, eye tracking cameras. This is where we have a big difference. The EYEGAZE Edge here on the left has our Encore camera, which is made by EYEGAZE Incorporated. The PRC device in yellow, that uses a Tobii Look camera, so a Tobii Dynavox Tobii camera. And then the Talk to Me Technologies has a different camera up top. So each one of these 3 eye tracking cameras may work the same for that individual, or they may work vastly different. So that's one thing that we will need to compare accuracy between these 3 eye tracking cameras on 3 different tablets. So this is a quick glimpse of 3 ways that we can compare any EYEGAZE device along the lines of hardware, software, or the camera that they have for eye tracking access. Okay, continuing on with this ASHA Perspectives article, it says that users' preferences must be considered as well. When evaluating EYEGAZE, SLPs should consider body and structure factors that will impact a client's performance on the system. These include vision, their physical status, their language ability, and their cognition. And then this article goes on to list some of the most common eye deficits that can impact or play into success or lack thereof with eye tracking include cataracts, ptosis, which is droopy eyelids, nystagmus, where the gaze is not steady but the eye movement bounces. We have alternating strabismus, where one eye may be more dominant in one part of the visual field and the other eye more dominant in a different part of the visual field. We have CVI, cortical visual impairment, and then mydriasis, which impacts the size of the pupil that can throw off some eye trackers. So these eye conditions here can be kind of mysterious in how they play out in the EYEGAZE assessment process, so we'll want to ask questions about these. Here we have an EYEGAZE user, and my question was, what does it mean for someone to have success? What does success look like? There are very small and simple ways to demonstrate success. For example, the patient types their first word and advocates for themselves. It's a small thing, but it's huge in the impact it has in their life, right? There are also some bigger things that can illustrate what is success. When someone gets on this device and starts flying, what does that look like? It may be, here is Maylin Chavez. She blogs about a photo shoot she went on using her EYEGAZE. That's success. An EYEGAZE user editing his music to sell a CD on iTunes. That has happened. Somebody who wrote and created a cookbook using their EYEGAZE device. Great success. A woman who's directing her medical care for the first time in 10 years. I've seen that. Huge success. A man who is still working as a CEO of a bank, and he's using his EYEGAZE system to negotiate a bank merger by email. True story. And then navigating accurately with confidence and fluency on their own device, whether it be on a simple 4-button page or on a very complex page. I would like to break down some of the steps in making the EYEGAZE AAC assessment procedure successful, starting with the initial contact. So first, how does the patient start finding about AAC EYEGAZE devices? We have this initial contact. They may learn about EYEGAZE devices from a disability organization like Cure SMA or the ALS Association. Maybe they went to a conference and they heard about these types of devices. Or they may have learned about it from their SLP or their neurologist. They may get on the internet and do their own research and find a manufacturer directly. Or they may be watching TV, I've run into this, and they see a story about communication devices or EYEGAZE, and then they start doing research. These are some of the common ways that I've seen people find out about these devices and start the process. So next, I would like to illustrate for you. Now, this is hypothetical, but the illustration is really important so we can understand the concept of a fair, thorough, and balanced EYEGAZE AAC assessment. So what steps do we have? First, the patient and/or the SLP arranges device trials so they can try them out before they make a decision. These patients may also be considering direct select devices, touchscreen. They may be using a head mouse or wondering, should I use a head mouse or should I use EYEGAZE? So they may come into this process not quite understanding which access method would be best for them. So they'll discover this. So they reach out to their SLP and they start trying out and doing their own research. And the SLP, us as evaluators, collect data and help them with this process. So they try device A, hopefully, they try device B, and then they try device C, and they give them each a test run. They ask questions, they compare, you collect data on the accuracy. And this yellow shape here talks about your assessment as the SLP, your data collection, feature comparison, and also listing and documenting the patient's experience, their preference, how they did on one device versus the other. And then as this article in ASHA Perspective said, the physiological considerations. So if you have a patient who has nystagmus in their eyes, and you saw that they calibrated and were accurately using one device over the others, you need to document that. And you need to educate that that's going to be something that will really impact them, that they should keep in mind as well. After this thorough evaluation, documentation of what you discussed, what you found, then the EYEGAZE device is selected and your SLP report documents your thorough evaluation. So you might say, this patient is unable to use a touchscreen device because they've lost strength and dexterity in their hands and upper extremities. Head mouse also is not a good option because, and then you list your rationale. And then you talk about how the EYEGAZE devices performed, what the patient was able to access, and what's important to them, and then give your recommendation. After your recommendation, the device is submitted, it's delivered to their home, there's training by the manufacturer, there may be ongoing speech therapy. Some of these patients are seeing us as outpatient clinicians, or they may have a home health episode open, and then they'll have ongoing technical support. And that completes the process, hypothetically speaking. If we look at this shape that I have put on the screen, it's balanced with a good foundation, almost like a flower vase, right? There's nothing out of balance here. It's going to stand on its own because we've gone through all the options, we've made a thorough documentation, we've made an appropriate recommendation, and then the patient was given a solid foundation of training, support, and ongoing technical support. Now, what does it look like when this doesn't happen? And I've seen this at various clinics where they say, well, we only have one device, so we try it, and if it works, then that's what they get. Later on, that can spell trouble. So let me show you the comparison image here. So what might this look like? Well, the patient or SLP tries a device. They try device A, or that's all they've heard about. They just hear about one device. The SLP writes a report and recommends that device. So there's not, you'll notice there's some data collection, but there's no comparison of features because there's nothing to compare it to. There's no patient preferences because the patient was not given a choice between valid working options. And then sometimes the device is trained or dropped off. There may be initial training, but that training and that setup is not thorough and it is not ongoing. So we have this shape here compared to what we had before, nice and thorough and balanced. Here, it's a little bit lopsided. Often what happens in these cases is the family or the individual gives up, and that's when they reach out to us for help. They may reach out to me. I work for EYEGAZE Inc. They may have found us on the internet and they say, we had no idea that there was more devices out there that we could have tried. Or they go to their SLP and say, why isn't my EYEGAZE device working? And they may have an eye condition that device doesn't handle very well. So this is what it looks like when this evidence-based, the EBP triangle is not followed. And what happens ultimately is the communicator suffers and often that device is given up. So what I have here is a communicator-centered model for EYEGAZE AAC assessment. The communicator, the individual needing this device, is in the center and is the center focused of all 4 of these groups. So I'll start with you SLPs on the upper right. You are there to support them and help them do their homework and to document a thorough investigation and recommend the best device based on the data that you've collected. Then to the left of that, you have the device manufacturer's representative. So me, the EYEGAZE manufacturer. You want to pick a company that has good support, good trainers and delivers a good device. So they will be your working partner. And then below that, you have the family. So this family has to be educated and trained so they can be independent as much as they can in supporting this communicator once the SLP leaves the picture or once the device training is done. And then we have other caregivers. So this may be rotating nursing staff. Say your patient goes into the hospital and they bring their device with them. There are other staff members that will have to interact with them using this device, and we'll have to set it up for them. With the communicator in the center, if we have all four groups well-trained and in working relationships with each other, it gives this communicator the highest chance of being successful, becoming fluent on that device, and not abandoning that device. So SLPs and me, the manufacturer, we can have a good working relationship to support the people that we're serving together. All right, so that is a big picture, the process of EYEGAZE AAC assessment. And again, at the end, I welcome questions on this, and I'm happy to talk offline. You can call our 1-800 number and we can talk about maybe how things are going in your region and what struggles you may have. Again, and this is not to push the product that I sell, but to really help you problem solve. I'm a fellow SLP, and that's, you know, I'm bound by my ethics to do that. What we would like to talk about now is how does eye tracking work in general? As we understand the foundational principles of eye tracking, it helps us when we're in the home to troubleshoot if things go wrong. So I have a picture here. The pictures that I show are going to be mostly pictures of the EYEGAZE Edge and images captured from this system. But again, these principles are going to be general, and we can apply them to whatever device that our patient shows up with, or whatever device you may have currently at your clinic. So, okay, let's jump into this. What we have here is a basic illustration of eye tracking. We have the system with the camera at the bottom. That camera is pointing an LED infrared light or lights up at that person's eyes and face, and it's pulsing those lights, and it's taking pictures of the eye as it's pulsing the light. That person then is looking on the screen, and along this triangle here in blue, the image processing software, the eye tracking software, is mathematically calculating through algorithms where that person is looking on that screen based on the math that it captures during the calibration process. So here's what eye tracking looks like if we could see it. Eye tracking devices use something called the pupil center corneal reflection principle of eye tracking. Now that's a big word. Let's break it down so we can understand. On the screen right here, we have an image from the EYEGAZE Edge of the pupil center. So the first arrow is pointing to the pupil center. You see that the pupil is lit up like a full moon. And in the center of that pupil, the image processing software has placed a tracking mat. And the corneal reflection, or the glint spot, is down here, kind of at the perimeter of the pupil. This corneal reflection is where that infrared light is entering the eye, going into the eye, hitting the retina in the back and reflecting off and illuminating the eye and coming back out of the eye. So this is the pupil center corneal reflection principle. These 2 points of light that we see on the screen are tracked by that eye tracking camera. And as that person looks around, those points of light in relationship to each other change position. And that's how it predicts where that person is looking. Let's look at some illustrations of that. Oh, let me go back here before we do that. The next slide is the eye conditions that are mentioned in this article. So again, these points of light have to be visible by the camera. If for some reason it's not visible, that's when we start having difficulties in eye trackers not tracking the eyes accurately. Next, let's jump into some of the eye conditions that are mentioned in this ASHA Perspectives articles that can impact accurate eye tracking. So first, we have dry eyes, then we have goopy eyes, or eyes that are not clear, nystagmus, we have strabismus, mydriasis, cataracts, and then contact lenses. So calibration is the process of mapping the radius of curvature of that person's eyeball and mapping where the center of the macula is on the retina. So the camera needs to be able to scan the smooth and curved surface of the cornea in order to accurately track that eye. So again, the process of calibration is mapping the curvature of this person's eye. All right, so this image here, let's look at that eye image. The first eye image I showed you a few slides back had those 2 points of light, the pupil center and the corneal reflection that's needed to track an eye. With this eye, there is some goop. There is some material that's on the cornea, and we see that because we can see streaks right across the pupil. And those 2 points of light are not present because of that. So if we look at this eye image, we know that eye tracker is not going to work. Goopy eyes is typically caused by a reduced blink rate, which causes congealed tears to not wash away, leaving the corneal surface not smooth and has debris on it. So the surface of the eye appears streaked or blotchy. And like I said, we'll note the absence of the pupil center dot and the glint spot, those 2 points of light. So what is the solution here? The solution is to ask if it's appropriate for that person to use eye drops, whether they use over-the-counter eye drops or maybe they have prescription eye drops that their doctor recommends for them. Again, not every eye tracking system on the market will give you this eye image visual right on the screen. This image, like I said, is from the EYEGAZE Edge. However, these principles will carry over whether you're using a Tobii Dynavox device, Prenke Romic, Talk to Me Technologies, Forbes Rehab. So if you're having trouble, the first thing you want to think is, there may be something on the surface of that eyes. Maybe I'll ask if they ever use eye drops and if that would be appropriate for them. Often that can help tremendously. Okay, next let's talk about cataracts. Let's start by looking at this eye image. If you look in the pupil, this upper image, you see 2 dark, small polka dots. Those are cataracts. The one below is also a cataract. It's a little bit more spread out and irregular shaped. Now, a cataract is a clouding of the lens inside the eye, and this causes interruption of that infrared light that goes in the eye and needs to bounce out of the eye. So it gets in the way and it blocks that light. Cataracts can be age-related or medication-related, depending on what's going on in their body. So the solution is, depending on the size and the shape of that cataract, the EYEGAZE screen the position may change to kind of get around that. Or a cataract can be surgically removed if it's best for that person. Okay, moving along. Here we have an eye that has had cataract removal surgery. Now this procedure is called lens replacement surgery. It's removal of the clouded lens, and new lenses are inserted through the person's cornea. This surgery is popular and it's highly effective. The problem, though, is after lens replacement surgery, some people have significant difficulty on certain parts of their EYEGAZE screen. They can't access those parts of the screen anymore. Now, why is that? If we look at the top image here, we have 2 points of light on that pupil, but we notice neither one of them is in the center. So what this is when the doctor places an artificial lens in someone's eye, it can sometimes create an artificial glint spot, an extra spot of light that throws off the eye tracker. It's not a guarantee that will happen, but sometimes it does. So if someone is having a difficult time after cataract removal, they may do better on a device that has cataract artificial lens correction software written into it. So that might be something very important for those individuals. Again, try it out and see. So the solution would be artificial lens correction software or changing the position of that device if that helps. Again, you kind of try and see what works. So let's talk a little bit about contact lenses. So what is the deal with them? I really like this image. This is from the internet. I like that we can see clearly that there's a contact lens over this cornea. When someone is wearing contact lenses, it becomes, in essence, the surface of the cornea. So like I said before, that contact lens needs to be clean and smooth, just like the cornea. Now, I know when I wear contact lenses, I prefer glasses because my contact lenses get very dry and irritated very quickly. Some of our patients have the same experience, others don't. The contact may move around slightly when that person blinks, then opens their eyes. However, eye gaze use with contacts is doable. It's often successful and the person just needs to try it. Let's talk about a few more eye conditions that are mentioned. So first, nystagmus is the rapid involuntary movement of the eyes. And then strabismus, which we have pictured on the left, is where both eyes cannot gaze at one point. In layman's terms, it's called lazy eye. Strabismus is where both eyes are not converging on one point. So what's the solution there? With strabismus, we want to track the dominant eye. So here we're looking at the image of the left. This child's right eye is looking straight ahead. So we're going to try tracking that right eye. The left eye has strabismus. Now, mydriasis is what's pictured on the right. It's abnormal dilation of the pupil. And we see here, the image on the right, this boy's right eye is abnormally dilated. This was a side effect with a chemical side effect that this boy had. This is an image from the New England Journal of Medicine. But some eye trackers will do better or worse with pupils that are abnormally large or abnormally small. So the solution is to use an eye tracker that can track one eye or that has software that will accommodate that person's pupil size. A few other eye conditions mentioned. So first, this image on the left is a pupil that is abnormally small, and some eye trackers, depending on how big or small that pupil is, may be able to handle it or may lose tracking. So again, you talk to the staff or the engineers of a company and say, what can you do with this size of pupil, and see if they can make it work. On the right, this is common. Sometimes with adults with ALS, we have ptosis of the eyelids. We see that the top eyelid is starting to droop over the pupil. The solution to this is to use an eye tracker that has compensation in their software for ptosis. Now, for users with alternating strabismus, where the eyes are alternating dominance, you may try, as I have pictured here, a nasal side patch. So here we have a person with a nasal side patch on their left eye, and we're going to track the right eye. What we found anecdotally is when we put a nasal side patch on the eye that is not being tracked, and we track the more dominant eye, it can help that eye that's available become more dominant. Again, it's anecdotal, but we've seen it work for some people. So there's a lot of troubleshooting and problem solving that comes into this, and the EYEGAZE manufacturer's rep can help you out with this. All right, moving right along. Some devices have some sort of visual feedback on the screen. This is an image from the EYEGAZE Edge, which has an eye image on every screen. We have other devices that have images that will show the distance or is their head in the appropriate place. I found teaching the patients to rely on and use this visual feedback will help them with carryover and independence, so they can know the positioning and how to become fluent and quick on their device. Here are some references here, will be in the slides, and that's my last slide actually. So why don't we go into some Q&A, and Lee, if I could have you pull up the Slack channel and maybe read off some of the questions. As you're looking for that, again, our phone number is 1-800-EYEGAZE. If you have patient-specific questions on atypical eye conditions or why an eye tracking device isn't working for one of your patients, we'd love to talk to you about that with our, we have 3 decades of experience doing this. All right, so I'll give a minute here, and I'm going to show my face.
There we go. I've got the Slack channel up. Some people are typing, so let's see what they say.
Yes, I'll give some time there.
We have a question from Rebecca C. that says, do you have information on adjusting for CVI as it changes over time?
That is a great question. That ASHA Perspectives article mentioned 6 eye conditions, and CVI was the last one. I found that CVI, we know, can be very, very tricky. My experience is with the EYEGAZE Edge, and I don't have a lot of experience with patients with CVI. However, Rebecca, I can connect you to one of our reps who also is an SLP who may have some more information on that, because that is definitely tricky. So I would, if you could reach out to me by email, they're on my slides, and I can connect you to someone who may be able to talk about that. I can't speak too much about that.
We have another question. What data collection method do you suggest for the eye tracking assessment?
Great question. So there's not a standardized formal assessment tool. And of course, there's talk about wouldn't that be great so we can have a valid comparison across platforms. So there are a few communication profiles online. I'm thinking of the one by Lisa Bardock up in Michigan. She makes a communication profile that talks about the priorities of the communicator and what's important to them, and kind of ranks in a hierarchy so they can look at devices that have those. So there's that type of question and answer preference. Data collection though, when if I were to go into a clinic and facilitate with the SLP a demonstration of our device among other devices, I'm going to say this to the SLP. All right, so calibration, there should be some sort of numerical data or data that you can collect when they calibrate that tells how accurate that calibration was. So that's the first point of data that we're going to take. Next, we're going to, with what's important to the user, say they're a picture icon communicator. With say 18 cells or 24 cells, we're going to go into a page and see how accurate they were in hitting all 18 of those cells, right? If they're a pediatric patient that is on a 4-choice board, we're going to pull up a page of 2 choices and 4 choices and collect the data on how accurately are they accessing those buttons with the size they are. But then also, we're going to be seeing receptive language and expressive language, and is it appropriate? With our adults who are using a QWERTY keyboard, we're going to get into a phrase page and see how accurate they are. So if they went through 10 buttons, how many of those did they hit accurately? Were they able to follow your direction and go one by one? On a keyboard, were they able to hit those smaller buttons accurately? And what could they do with that? For example, we want to start simple and start with a simple word. I like to start with cat or dog. I have them type cat 5 times. It's a simple word. They don't have to think about the spelling. And then I might move on to another simple word like their name. And then I might say, can you type hello for me? So we're going to increase the task difficulty and take some basic data collection on that. Some patients say it's really important for me to access my email. So I may get into the internet page and see if they can hit the buttons according to my command and just take some basic data on that. Those are the type of data points that I think are really important. Some representatives I've seen in their demonstrations, they go in and they say, oh, it can do this and it does this and it does this. And they don't actually get the communicator in on a keyboard to see if it works, if they can actually communicate on it. And that's vital that they be given that chance during that short window of time.
Okay, lots of questions rolling in. Question from Brianna, which I think you kind of already answered, but any suggestions for specific activities to try as a person is trialing different devices to help them decide which one they like? Yeah,
so let's talk to maybe the pediatric patient population and then the adults. So for pediatric, again, we're going to, and we're thinking about this already, right? Like how many targets will be appropriate? What should they look like? What language system should I be starting to get them into? So we want to get whatever we think might be appropriate and start off with something simple. It may be as simple as a cause and effect game, like a look to learn, where they look and something happens, and the child learns that they're making that happen. Simple choices between choice A, choice B, make that 3 choices or 4 choices. So try and make it relevant to them. If they're at the stage of learning this cause and effect, then keep it at that level. If they're a teenager who's communicating and they may be looking for a new device, get them into a page set that might be appropriate for them, see if they're accurate, and then start evaluating, is this, is this language system appropriate for them? For our adults, kind of like I mentioned, it's really important that they show their accuracy on something that's functional. If they are a keyboard typer, they should be able to get into a keyboard, and you can give them a little coaching, you know, look at Q, W, E, R, T, Y, but see if they can accurately target those, maybe spell their name, and start getting into that functional communication stuff pretty quickly. Because often in your assessment, you may have 2-hour window and you have 3 vendors coming in, or a couple devices you're trying, and you don't have a lot of time, right? You may have the liberty of having a time, or the patient may say, hey, I really like that device. Can I request a trial in my home? Maybe I can try it out for a couple days or a week. Often that's possible. Good question.
We have a question from Sherry that says, do you have information about using EYEGAZE for people with cerebral palsy?
Good question, Sherry. Yes, so CP is interesting because we have individuals who may have quite a bit of spastic, uncontrolled movement. Other people may have kind of upper body control, but their limbs have more spasticity. So the biggest thing for CP, like I said before, is of course we want to find the appropriate language system for their cognitive linguistic level. But then I found it's very important to find an eye tracker that will track their eyes with either their upper body movement, their head movement, or anything that may be going on with their eyes. So again, I recommend finding devices that, like I know, well, every EYEGAZE device that I am aware of, the big ones that I named, are serving people with CP successfully. And that's part of the investigation when you try different devices and seeing how that camera is able to pick up that person's eyes and will it translate into functional use. Some people with CP will, they have various levels of dexterity. So they may have direct select access where they're slowly touching a screen. So the question may be, should they be a direct selector or should we move to EYEGAZE if it's quicker? So some of the data I didn't mention before we can take is the speed, like words per minute, or how quickly they can complete a task, and try different methods. We have seen, though, that there may be someone with CP at a certain cognitive linguistic level, and they can use it with EYEGAZE, but if they have access to slowly touch the device with their hand, they may prefer and insist that they use their hand rather than their eyes. So that's something to look at too, you know, which one are they gravitating towards? Even though we may say, okay, let's try it with your eyes now, we may still see them reaching out for that tablet and slowly pushing it, because that's what their body is used to doing. Yeah, good question.
So that's good, because that kind of ties into this next question, which is thinking of long-term use and support. How do you suggest determining whether EYEGAZE is a viable access method for a student?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll give an example of a student who was asking the question. Well, let me give a little background. He was using K through 12. He was using an AAC device with a pointer on his head, like a pointing stick that he would use to access and touch a keyboard in front of him. And that worked well for him for many years. He got to the point now where he was saying, oh, I've seen this head mouse, but I've also heard of EYEGAZE. You know, what should I do? You know, which one would be best for me? So he lined up a trial of all 3 access methods. Now this young man he had just graduated and was going into college. So he had this metacognition where he was kind of aware that he was himself comparing it. We may have a younger child where they may not be able to analyze it. So we have either the therapist or the educators or the parents kind of trying to understand what would be best for them. So the first step is really to try and allow them a trial of every type of access method that might be a possibility. And if it's possible to get one of those devices, say if it's a head mouse, see if you can borrow a head mouse for a week and try that. So this young man, that's what he did. He ruled out the pointer stick on his forehead, but he said, okay, I want to try a tablet with a head mouse, and I also want to try the same tablet with an EYEGAZE camera. He had a week trial of each, and by the end, he decided to go with the head mouse. So again, just allowing the opportunity to try out, and if you can get data collection over a week's time, if you have that luxury, that would be, you know, more data will help us see things more clearly. That would be my first recommendation.
And keep going, take a couple more.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any resources for assessing very young kids with movement disorders who are new to AAC? Kathy says they see kids as young as 3 for EYEGAZE assessments.
Okay. So with movement disorders, any eye tracking camera that you have, any system, will have a camera at the bottom with lights like I described. And some devices have a bigger, what we call a head box. So that's where the head needs to stay in order for the camera to see the eyes. Some devices have a smaller head box. So again, that's the beauty of trying out different devices. Their cameras will allow different movements. With children who have movement disorders, there is a certain degree of stability that is required for their head and their upper body to stay within that head box that is allowed by the eye tracking camera. So hopefully this child, this student that you're seeing, maybe 3-year-old, hopefully they have a supportive wheelchair set up where they can come in and they're supported properly. They have OT, PT who have really said, okay, this is the best positioning for them and supports for them. When they're in school, I'm thinking about, we may see one of these kids at home where they're laying on their favorite couch with their supports in place. It's kind of their relaxation station at home is one thing, but then when they get in the wheelchair and they come to school, they may be sitting up more and gravity is not pulling them down and keeping them as still. So making sure that they try a device in environments where it's functionally going to be used. So if they're sitting upright in their wheelchair, how is their upper body movement? And if it is too extreme, are there any appropriate and safe ways to help that student get more in the zone for eye tracking? That's the question that we should be asking. If a child or an adult is having a lot of uncontrolled upper body movement, what I have done, I've done this with like children of 10 years old, is get them on, say if I go to their home, I get them on a couch that reclines and see if we can eliminate that and see if, first of all, what we want to see is, are their eyes trackable? And then the question after that is, okay, their eyes are trackable. How can we get their body to stay in that zone where the camera that they're using is going to see those eyes and use that option that they have. Their eyes are available to be tracked. So playing around with things like that with the input of our fellow team members, OT, PT, parents often say, oh yeah, I've tried this before. So asking those questions is a good first place to start.
Okay, one last quick one.
Okay.
Do you have a grid comparing EYEGAZE systems?
Oh, very good question. So I do have one informally that we're actually beefing up because technology, we all know, manufacturer comes out with a new version, and so we need to, different software and better battery power. So I have one partially put together, and I'm happy to connect with you and share that with you when it's completed with some revisions we're putting up.
James, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I don't work with kids with EYEGAZE, so this was, okay. I just found this like so fascinating and full of such good information. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Just a reminder to everyone listening, the link is posted. Brian posted it in the Track 3 group, so make sure you go fill out that survey and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, you. Have a good day. Bye, James. Thank you.
Bye-bye.